Marcus, when you think about the racial justice protests that we saw this spring and summer, what kind of similarities do you see between that and what happened back in the 60s during the civil rights movement?
I see identical, direct relationship. Everything that they were fighting for in the 60s, better housing, not to be killed by the police, better opportunities, better education. Even though those marches in the spring were predicated on another killing of a black man, they wound up being about all of those things as well. So I see direct comparison between the two.
Would you say that what happened this summer was successful?
Yes. I would say it was successful in that it brought attention and a national awareness to the same old problem, but in a different way, in a way that people couldn't look away from, people couldn't ignore. And so while not everything that we hoped for was achieved, there was a lot of progress made as far as bringing attention to an issue that won't go away.
When you think of Dr. King's legacy, what are some of the first things that come to mind for you?
I think that he was a thinker and he was a long term planner. And I think one of the most important things that he said over and over, which gets short shrift when people remember him, is economic development and looking for the future to become economically self sufficient as a people, to create our own institutions, to create our own streams of revenue, our own businesses, and access to the education, which makes some of that possible. So I want people to remember that when they remember Dr. King, that what resonated with me was his focus on economic justice.
What else was it about Dr. King and that message that resonated and that ultimately made it so successful?
His message was one of basic fairness and peacefulness, which is something we haven't seen in the current protests. But he was looking not for extra, not to slice anybody out of their opportunities. He was just looking for fairness and equal opportunities for all, which means justice for all. So again, I think his was a message of peace and justice, but just fairness for people. That's not an extraordinary concept.
Mm. What do you think Dr. King would have thought about the way things went down this summer?
He would have loved that it was led by young people because his movement was led by young people. He was a young man actually at the very beginning of that movement. So he would have loved that the movement was uh, determined, decided, designed, developed by young people. And he would have loved the fact that they were relentless. They kept going when people said, haven't you protested enough? Isn't that enough already? He liked their let me try that again. Indefatigability and and their persistence. Yeah, let me switch to persistence. But he would have liked that they just kept going and kept their eyes on the prize.
So, how are organizations like yours all across Oregon helping to further some of the ideals of Dr. King's?
We are trying to take this moment to further those ideals by going back to first principles, very simple things. What makes someone a whole citizen? What makes them a whole person? A home, food, education, opportunity. And so all you'll see the organizations that work with us and that we partner with, we try to focus on the first principles, the very simple things that make life worth living and make citizens want to be good civic and civically engaged citizens.
I can't let you go this morning without asking you about what happened, the riots in the nation's capital, storming a building, insurgency. Looking at it through the lens of your work and also the lens of Dr. King as we approach the holiday, can you say more about how you're feeling and what you're seeing?
When I think about those riots, I think of two quotes, maybe one from Malcolm X, the chickens coming home to roost, you reap what you sow. And then one from a football coach, Denny Green, they were who we thought they were. What those mean to me is that you cannot be surprised when you have the physical manifestation of all the vitriol and the evil and the hate mongering that goes on online, led by leadership in this country. And it's not specific to just one person, it's led by leadership. So when I saw those protests at our nation's capital, where I went to school, where I lived for almost 20 years of my life, I was sad, I was distressed, I was overwhelmed. But the one thing I was not was surprised. And until a lot of other Americans understand that it's not surprising, this will be the outcome if you traffic in the misinformation and disinformation, then we're going to keep getting this same thing over again. It's not surprising, but it did sadden me to the core.
Marcus, where do we go from here?
Well, we go to healing and reconciliation, but we cannot have that without acknowledgement and some repentance. You're not going to get better unless you acknowledge the sins of the past. And we have a whole raft of sins of the past, but it's baby steps. First, just acknowledge what happened was not an accident, not an aberration, but and inevitable, but it's not irreparable. So what can we do? We can take small steps forward every day. I don't know all the political machinations. I don't know if impeachment is the right way, although I embrace it. I don't know if censure or the 25th Amendment, but I do know whatever we have to do, we have to move forward one step at a time. And we have to look back. People say, don't look back. Let's just move ahead. We must look back. We must acknowledge what happened, never forget it, and then begin to take steps forward, but one small step at a time.
Are you hopeful?
With the changes that nobody could have predicted a year ago in our national leadership, in two senators from Georgia, and some of the changes that I've seen, I am hopeful. The vaccine, that's a very important thing, about how we get back to normal American life. So I am hopeful, but I am cautious. And I do not want us to forget. I'm going to be one of the people making the clarion call, say, you keep talking about the past. You keep talking about the past. I'm going to remind people of that every day, even as I try to exude a hopeful approach to the future.
Yeah, fair enough. This is going to be airing on Monday on the MLK holiday. What would you like people in our local community to do or to pursue or to explore on Monday?
I would like people to explore the notions again of economic justice, but, try to take a moment of reflection. If there's a day of service, that's great. We always need help with volunteers, but reflect and on what has transpired over the last year and why. And then I would encourage people to look at about 3 different kinds of media. Look at media from the right, from the left, and the middle, and see if they can reconcile what they're hearing in all 3 spaces. We have to have better streams of information and communication, and not just one stream of information, because I think that's partly how America got lost. I hate to say, these little echo chambers. Now I'm echoing them, but these little echo chambers are dangerous. Spread your information stream. It's like mixing up your diet. Please do that, America.
Marcus, is there anything that I should have asked you but didn't? Any other direction that you wanted to go this morning?
There's a lot of people in decision-making places around our community, around the nation. I would just ask them, whenever they're making a decision that affects other people, consider their position. In the work that we do, we call that using the equity lens, using a lens from someone else's perspective. But I would just encourage all the people that are in power to use that equity lens or use that other person's lens, however you want to do it, but just use that viewpoint before you make a decision that's going to determine a negative outcome for someone's life. And I think Dr. King would want us to do that. Just reflect a moment before we make life-altering decisions for someone else. I guarantee you, if the people at the Capitol had thought for 20 minutes before that siege that they did down at our nation's capital, most of them wouldn't have still gone in there. Many of them would, but most of them would not. So just a moment of reflection.
Well said. We'll leave it there. Marcus, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you for inviting me. Take care.